Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, Brendan Ryan gives an update on the success of selective dry cow therapy in the Pallaskenry dairy herd, despite challenges of high somatic cell count while cows transition to a new milking system and a later than normal milk recording.
The last back end of the year, autumn last year, came wet, and we actually ended up carrying, I suppose we didn't end up carrying higher covers, but we carried an overall higher farm cover, closing cover at the end of November of 820, which would have been close enough to 100 more than what I would have budgeted on. Usually go for closing up there at 750 and opening around the 1,000 mark, 1,000 to 1,100. But on the, say the 1st of February, then 30th of January, opened up at 1,300, excess of 1,300 of a cover, and so it brought challenges trying to meet targets. So the first target we always trying to meet is get the 30% graze by the 1st of March. Start nipping in there on covers of 800 to 1,000, trying to get through it. And obviously, with a high 6-week calving rate, demand is significantly increased by, especially coming on to the middle of February. We'd have 50% calved in 2 weeks, like. So the first target, so the 1st of March, go for the 30% that we hit that target. Struggled a small bit to hit the target of 66% by Paddy's Day, because of the weather came that bit tricky there from the 10th to the 15th of March. There was even 2 weekends there that came tricky, and we had to house. And then at that we had a lot of the dry ground grazed, and was left with covers of nearly 1,800 and 2,000 of the highest of the wedge that would have been too wet to graze all through February as well. So yeah, like, I mean, getting cows to grass, we milk on, we go on once a day for maybe the first 3 weeks of calving. There's a night person on calving, and locking barriers in front of the cows. The cows have ad-lib silage after milking in the evenings. Then barriers are locked 5-6 o'clock in the morning. Cows go to grass, weather dependent, at 10 o'clock in the morning. They're in then, come in then for milking time, then start around 2 o'clock. And where the opportunity arises, they will go out for 3 hours. They went mainly out for February for 3 hours after milking, and back in then again on 3 kilos of silage, ad lib again. Just very important, I suppose, on off grazing, that I suppose cows, yes, they are restricted a small bit before they go out, but they have ad lib until everything has silage until it's locked off. Like, we're not running out of silage there at 2 o'clock in the morning and then suddenly come on there at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning and then decide it's raining and we have to get silage into them and we can't leave them out. And they're like, it's just cows and heifers come under pressure then at that stage. So ad lib silage until we lock off 4 hours without silage, and then they go out for their belly of grass and they come in for milking.
And I think it's a good point you make, Brendan, and I guess it reflects that balance you're trying to achieve, and, you know, achieving those grazing targets, but also making sure that the cow is fed. And looking then to, I guess, you know, you mentioned you hit the target for the 1st of March. You know, you struggled a bit in early March. You know, at what stage did you move to the second round? And, you know, what sort of availability of grass had you at that point?
So we moved to the second round actually 5 days earlier than budgeted. So on the 2nd of April, we started mixing the second round, which would have been 1,200 covers, with the last of the first round, which would have been 800, 1,800 and 1,900 covers. And we actually lifted and went straight full-time second rotation then by the 5th. So there was a 3-day transition there, I suppose, just to kind of transition in their stomachs. I suppose you're going into lighter, softer grass, second rotation, as opposed to more dense, higher dry matter in the the second round, and obviously minerals in the meal and through the water was very important then at that stage, because they were running the risk of magnesium going into the start of the second rotation.
And to the cow, Brendan, from a cow health perspective, how did the calving season of 2021 go?
Yeah, from the cows actually, calving season went overall went well, but I mean we did encounter problems, and we always encounter problems every year. So I mean there was 4% of the cows that calved got milk fever, and it wasn't all the lay calvers, but predominantly it was, we'll say 60%, 60 to 70% of them. Over condition, I suppose, was a problem there for the Enton after the 10th of March, I suppose 15th of March. Cows would have been dry, fully dry by the 15th of December, and cows that are not calving then for the 3 months and 4 months after, on 78% DMD silage, like it's just it's a recipe for disaster, really, to be honest.
And you've obviously reflected on that, Brendan. If you know the proportion of cows and the type of cow that fell into that category that got milk fever post calving. You know, as you reflect, are there actions that ye plan for the coming dry period? Say, I know it's very far away at this point, but how will ye change to reduce or eliminate milk fever from the herd next year?
Yeah, so I suppose back in October, I'd always go for a body condition score in October, picking out the cows then that are thin, ones they're making sure they're on par for drying off, and everything is, for your planning. You're only a month away from starting to dry off heifers then at that stage, and I suppose one thing I didn't do was Christmas is I know it's a bad time for labour as well, but going forward, first week of January, cows would want to be body condition scored again, and divided accordingly into their groups, closest to calving, furthest away from calving, and then what comes into the category then of overweight and thin. I suppose, look, it does add extra labour as well, but I mean, if it's going to run to take away the risk of milk fever, like, I mean, the prolonged effect it has on the cow is it's hidden. Like, I mean, if you follow them through, missing 3 weeks, 6 weeks of cycling, it becomes very expensive, like.
And as you say, I guess the body condition score on the first week of January, when you're not so busy, is, I guess time saved in treating that cow for milk fever when you're at the height of calving. I guess looking then to somatic cell count, and Brendan, we would have had a discussion last autumn, about your dry cow procedure and your use of selective dry cow therapy. Can you remind us about the decisions that ye made in the autumn of 2020 in terms of whether a cow is suitable for a selective dry cow or she would get antibiotics as a dry cow treatment?
Yeah, so the criteria was same as the year before. The dry period 2019, 86% of the herd was dried off with sealer only. So last year that took a drop. 69% were dried off with sealer only, mainly because we had a very young herd the year before last, and they matured on now, so it's harder to keep it up as high when you have more cows in the herd. I would the 200,000 is the cutoff. So the last 3 milk accordance, and under 200,000 for the whole year was the cutoff we worked on, and it seems to have worked well.
And looking then to the start of this year, so cows started calving down in and around the 1st of February. Can you give us, an idea of the somatic cell count from calving and how it progressed through early lactation?
When we start supplying milk at the start, there's a lot of fresh cows go into it together, and once a day as well. So it does stay high. Like, I mean, we started getting tests at the start of 300,000, and if you got case of mastitis and you hadn't caught it the morning of it, it goes an extra day, and it's very hard to control cell count in that sense. We would have got 300, 350 for a couple of tests. Drop back then when they settle in a bit to 200 to 250, kind of hovering 200 to 250. And then usually working after the year before last, when we go on to twice a day milk recording or twice a day milking, we'd milk record the middle of February. We'd pick out the problem cows, treat them, and we'd usually get a good drop down to back to 120, 130, 40,000 within the week of going to twice a day and the milk recording done. But unfortunately this year, we moved into the new parlour, suppose the middle of February, still on once a day, and then would have transitioned to twice a day coming to the end of February, and went for a milk recording. We were late doing a milk recording to start, and then went to do a milk recording, and unfortunately we couldn't get a milk recording done in the new parlour until the second week of March. So it has shown the effects.
A few points there to pick up on, Brendan. The first one that really sticks out to me is the first milk recording and the time that you'd put on that. So like a lot of people would aim for before St. Patrick's Day, and what you're talking about there is the middle of February, essentially a month earlier. Is that too early? And what is the justification for going in the middle of February?
Well, I suppose the system ran is like it's a compact calving system. So I mean, yes, your 6 week calving rate is 80, 85%, 86% this year. But you got to go back and look at the 3 week, like even the 2 weeks. Like most farmers are calving half their herd in 2 weeks and 60%, 65% in 3 weeks. I mean, if you're waiting, a lot of people would say they wait until most of the cows are calved St. Patrick's Day. Like you have cows there that are 60, 70 days, 60 days in milk. And if there is a problem there, it's very hard to solve it, I suppose, the longer it goes. It's not caught early enough. Like.
So essentially what you're doing is you're acting early and picking up on those problem cows. And I guess also then an interesting fact that you're talking about, moving to a new parlour, and, from what I'm aware, you were the conventional herringbone and you're moving to the rotary. What sort of changes, like obviously there's the stress of introducing cows to the new parlour, but outside of the milking facility, what other changes, or were there other changes that you saw, I guess, for the herd of cows, moving from the herringbone that they've had for a number of years and into the rotary now?
Like, I mean, you have to allow for that, moving into a new parlour, that cell count is going to rise that bit as well. So I mean, that's why cell count is running that small bit higher as well. It's not the full problem, but I mean, going back on last month's milk recording, cows that would have been always 20, 30, 40,000 cell count, would have rose up to 80, 90 and 100. Like, it's a small rise, but it's rising the overall cell count of the herd. Like, it's not a big level of infection. But I mean, the rotary parlour, it took the month or even 6 weeks for the cow and to get used to it, transition into it. Heifers took that very well, and the labour that it has saved is significant for the farm now at the moment. So ever since cows have gone out full time, wires are taken up, 3 grazings in most paddocks, one man system operation. Like it's the labour that is saved is unbelievable compared to last year.
And to those cows that, as you say, they were at anywhere between 20 and 40,000 on average, they've risen now and they're at 80 to 100. Do you anticipate that they will come back to their average that, as per their records, or do you see them having that elevated cell count for the year?
They have come back. In the last milk record, they have come back. It was at the stress period of some of them cows. Like, we would have had half the herd kind of calved when we moved in. Some of the cows then would have never stepped onto the rotary. And I mean, coming from calving, calf taken away, and then going to a parlour that they've never walked to, and hard to get them into even. It's a big stress period. So I mean, at the time of milk carton, they would have been higher than the usual, but I mean they're well settled in now, and cell count is back to running to between 110 and 130 now. So I mean, very happy now. Like, but it's just the effect that it had from not catching it early from early spring, that it took us the 2 milk cartons to get it back to where it should be.
And then if we reflect on the selective dry cow selection, and you mentioned that 69% of the herd were dried off without an antibiotic in the autumn of 2020, and that's based on your cut-off of 200,000. Do you know, that's something you mentioned you've used for 2 years now, so 2019, 2020. Are you happy with that number, or is that threshold too high?
I am happy with that number, but you need to get more. Need to get better at, I suppose, selecting cows that are like clean. I suppose, like cows that would have bits of warts on their teats, and ones that would be lying down off the cubicle, and maybe just dirty in general, I suppose. The ones they'd be qualifying for the selective dry cow under 200,000, no issue with Celcom, but they have shown problems of picking up early infection when obviously, like, cubicles are done twice a day, but like if they're not lying up on them, and they're like, you can never have a teat end that has warts on it. It'll never be clean. Like, it holds a lot of bacteria.
Looking then to the heifers, Brendan, you mentioned that they have transitioned very well, and you know, it's a reflection, I guess. They have no memory of milking in a herringbone parlour, so this, you know, while the milking procedure is all very new to them, you know, it's nothing than of what they're not used to necessarily. How are you finding heifer cell count this year?
Heifers actually have given small few problems. In general, like, I mean, you're talking 5% milking on 3/4, and 2% have been culled from milking back to 2/4, and a high cell counts already. So I mean, teat sealing are probably, it's definitely something that has to be considered for the farm going forward. I mean, from the year before last, heifers were teat sealed because it was the facilities weren't fully there. But I mean, there was no excuse this year, so it has shown that there is a problem there.
And when you say there was no excuse this year, Brendan, and you look back to, say, the winter of 2019 and compare to 2020, when you say facilities, are you talking about there's sufficient cubicles for the number of animals? You know, what exactly are you talking about there?
Yeah, so, like, I mean, it would have always been a cubicle per cow or cubicle per heifer, but a lot of animals that stage we were awaiting getting into a new shed, so a lot of animals would have been bedded on straw and peat, and even some on cubicles or on slats. So I mean, it's not the ideal condition. So we got them teat sealed, and worked very well, but decided to go against it for this year because they were obviously had in excess that even 5%, 10% extra cubicles this year, and clean, all line up, but it just has proved that teat sealing is on the cards for this year, go back doing teat sealing for this year.
And to wrap up, Brendan, you know, throughout our last conversation and the discussion today, selective dry cow therapy is something that you're very much tuned into. And people listening today, you know, they might have only dipped their toe in the water last year. You know, based on the experience that ye have over a number of years at Pallaskenry, can you give us any of your main learnings that you would have seen in last year's dry cow period that, you know, led to success or a lack of success that you will change going forward when you look at the dry cow procedure for 2021?
Well, I suppose the success is that all animals at the start are all individually quarter sampled, and it gives you that confidence to go ahead with it and go forward. And especially just jumping back to cases of subclinical mastitis, cases running at 500,000-600,000. That's one thing that I've learned, that like CMTs, it won't show up on most quarters, but sending off the sample, four samples off, and getting back your results, and then treating that quarter accordingly has worked really, really well. I suppose what hasn't worked well, last year, I suppose, when the cows would have been dried off, they would have been dried off in small bunches. By students, would have been done most of the drying off for me last year. But you're drying off 12 and 24 cows a day. It's hard to get the exact number of cubicle space for it when you're adding on extra cows every day, and you're giving them, and you can be limiting your milkers. Then at the other side, I suppose one thing I've learned is that definitely stick with the smaller groups, but cows that are dried off with sealer only, especially, need to be treated like a milker for at least 10 days after they've dried off. So I mean, this year the plan would be to keep them obviously in the group 10 days on their own. Walked onto the rotary for 10 days after milking, and every quarter checked, because we ran into problems last year at drying off 4 cows dried off, front quarters that would have picked up infection but not got sick with it. And it's very hard to herd a big number of cows inside in the shed when she's not showing any signs of sickness. And you can't individually check every cow when it's on cubicles and inside in the shed. They're going to keep walking around. So we would have ran that problem. We lost 2 quarters because of it, and the other 2 were treatable. They had mastitis and was early detection. So that's definitely a plan for this year. And just back to the same as usual, like that. The no rush, smaller numbers have plenty of help.
I think you've made some really good points there, Brendan. And, as you say, the 200,000 is your cutoff. And, I put it to you about that being a high threshold. People would have started, and, Pallaskenry would have started at the 50,000 on day one of the selective dry cow journey, let's call it. But as you say, within that 200,000, you're quarter sampling every cow. So if there is a situation where you have a cow with a cell count of 200,000, but one particular quarter has 500,000, you're going to treat that. You're not going to just seal her. I think also your point on, I would call it vigilance. You mentioned there is adequate facilities. You're scraping and liming cubicles, so the facilities are clean. But being aware of a cow that's going to, sit on the slats as opposed to sitting up on a cubicle, and also being aware of cows' udder structure. And if there are things like warts, that, that cow is potentially not suitable for the selective dry cow, because there's a surface area there that's going to capture disease and infection, and very much in line with what we would have heard in the from Don Crowley. And also your final point there in terms of being vigilant with those cows post dry off, in particular the selective dry cows, where you're going to, put them up onto the rotary or put them into the parlour and have a look at them to make sure there's no infection brewing in the early dry cow period. Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you, Emma-Louise. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. And my thanks to Brendan Ryan for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.